With me today is a returning speaker from last year's event. It's the Prudentialist. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing quite well. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. So, as I just mentioned, you spoke last year, and you're here again for round two. So, why are you coming back?
Well, very happy to be speaking again, and I'm very glad to be coming back because last year's event was not only the first for us here in the United States, but also it had set off a lot of the agendas for what came that following year. So, February of last year, it was the first time so many of us were in one room together focusing on a myriad of ideas. And it wasn't just the speeches, but also getting together, meeting, discussing ventures and businesses of what we would want to do. And so those talks and this conference really was the starting notions for what would later become the Old Glory Club, and trying to emphasize the need for people to take action locally. And so I'm coming back again to see what new ideas are there. There are plenty of new speakers that are coming in, so I'm excited to hear their ideas. And the theme about having common foundations, or maybe not needing those kind of common foundations to work together and to survive the future, I think is a conversation that needs to be had, and I'm very happy to attend.
We haven't actually discussed the theme publicly too much. I mean, it's announced, but we just haven't made a topic of conversation yet. So let's start on that, if you don't mind. Forging a common foundation. What does that mean to you? And can you give us a hint on our talk from your talk on what you're going to be saying?
Sure. So, to me, the idea of forging a common foundation, I think that may be more impressed upon the Americans more than perhaps anywhere else, because there's such a diversity of right wing, conservative, or just thought in general here in the States, and maybe more so in the UK, just because America is just so vast in its geography and its diversity of its people. And so, for everyone to sort of come together and forge this common foundation, it raises a fundamental question of, can we all get behind a single banner? Does this mean that it's going to be instances of Christianity? Does this mean that we're going to have some sort of will to power that will emerge and to sort of unite these, burgeoning factions everywhere? I think that that's an important thing to discuss. As for me, I think that the real question is that needs to be asked when we talk about foundations is just that we have spent so many years defining ourselves by what we are not, that we are against modernity, we are anti-progressive, we are against the left, or so on and so forth. And so it raises the important question of, well, what do you actually affirm? And so our politics for a long period of time, as long as I've been alive, really seems to be this kind of apophatic political theology. We know what we are by what we are not, and it seems very hard for people to define what they actually are. And that's a little hint of what I'll be talking about later this month or next month.
I think you're right that compared to us in the UK, you definitely have a bigger plurality of opinion on the right over in America. Do you view that as a strength in any way?
I certainly think it has its drawbacks, but also it can be used as a strength. One of the first discussions I had when I started coming out and about as the Prudentialist was that you can get 50 American people on the right and discussing a singular issue, and you'll get 250 different opinions on how to approach it. And I think that that's pretty universal for different people on the right, because there's just these desires for personalities that are going to butt heads, and we see this all the time on Twitter. But in America, I think that there is an advantage to it, because America is so large to some extent. I don't know if it knows itself anymore. So we've regressed, and I think that this is a very good regression, sort of that capital V return sort of meme. We've returned to our sort of regional identities, and so I think America is sort of returning to this Midwestern culture, this Southern culture, this New England culture, this rural blue state, red state culture. I think is very good, because it means that all these people are going to be together in one room and sort of hashing it out in a way that will allow us to sort of understand what may work for someone like myself who lives out in the middle of nowhere in Texas, compared to, say, someone who lives in like San Francisco. We're going to have vastly different political approaches. And I think we may agree on some things and we can forge that common foundation, but going forward, we may have to address what works for me may not work for thee.
Yes, and you certainly have that tradition over in America of more localized solutions than what we do. So, yes, hopefully you can hash something out there. When you said, though, that there's been a return to more local identities, I'm assuming you just mean on the right of the spectrum.
Well, yes. Well, also just in general, I think in America, I mean, the concept of a national identity, I think, has kind of been weathered down by its mythological operating costs. I mean, Yarvin talks about like the two-story state and whatnot. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. That one side still adheres to this old style American civic religion of its constitution, its founding, the Stars and Stripes, versus one that is far more meta-modern, where it looks at itself and it's constantly reifying its diversity and how we can reincorporate that into the stories. This old tradition versus this sort of parasitized, quote-unquote, living tradition. And I think we're seeing a return to that. Well, if we can't really identify as American to any sort of sense of agreement for a country of like 330 some odd million people, then we can probably agree that when someone comes into town that, oh, that guy's from the Midwest, or oh, that guy's from California. It's such an LA thing to say. So you've got a distinctive return to people identifying themselves by region, by where they're from, rather than the nation writ large.
I think what I was thinking is on the left there seems to be less of a distinction between the North and South and the East and West of America than there used to be. Certainly, as everyone has become more metropolitan, living in these big cities and connected to the internet and global trade and economy a lot more, the left seems to have reduced their diversity of thought quite a lot. How much of the plurality of thought of the right do you think you need to sacrifice in order to combat that effectively?
Well, I suppose that's really going to be the subject of our conference, and I'm looking forward to hearing that out. As a sort of innate gut reaction, I do think that there will have to be some culling of ideological differences or ideological diversity in order to achieve some kind of cohesive block that can either stand the test of time. This may, of course, change. This may be diversified where these cohesive blocks, in one part of the country, say the more metropolitan, more urban side of the right, in say the Silicon Valley or New York City, they may cull out some of the more rural, agrarian type of conservatism in order to survive, whereas that may be the inverse from where we are. So I'd imagine that there will be some culling of, like, say, diversity of, say, right-winger and conservative intellectual thought, but I think it will be heavily dependent based upon where you live.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. You mentioned that the event last year set the agenda for quite a few of you. What are you looking for this year, apart from the actual topic of forging common foundation? Are there any particular hopes that you have? You just want to see old friends again?
Well, as much as a pleasure as it is to see old friends again and to meet new friends that we've made since last year and to meet them in person and to see what they have to say. I mean, as much as great as the speeches are and the common theme, one of the best parts about it was actually getting to know these people that you've been communicating with online, whether that's, trying to coordinate who's who from Twitter, from Discord, or from Matrix and so on, to discussing what you actually want to get done. I mean, businesses were started, organizations and clubs were started based upon these meetings. And a lot of people looked at the last year's event, especially in America, with this newfound sense of optimism that, of course, last year we were in the midst, of course, of the Biden administration. This was right before the war in Ukraine had broken out. But for Americans, there was just this newfound sense of maybe there are still there's obviously things that still need to be done, but there was a sense of optimism and this renewed energy. And I look forward to the fuel being put back into the gas can again, because I think the scene, to some respects, does desperately need a swift kick in the pants, and these kind of conferences are tantamount to that.
Absolutely. A year is a long time in politics, as you say. How do you think our scene has changed since the last event, which was it was over a year ago now because it's just before the Ukraine war? But what do you think are the most important differences in how we've evolved?
I mean, a year, it would also, I mean, like you said, a year is a long time in politics. A year is an even longer time, I suppose, for those that exist primarily in the digital. And so, I mean, the names and faces that spoke last year, of course, some of them, I haven't seen around very much and very often. Others, the focus from last year, of course, these strategies for navigating the ruins. And I don't think one clear-cut strategy was the one that made it out, or one defining thesis for how we are to go forward was decided upon. And so I feel like every time that people get together and actually hash things out, whether that's in business or just in politics, is that you finally get to see so much of the catty disputes and spats. And despite the fact that from last year and even to today, we're recording this on May 30th, that there's still debates about Nietzscheanism and Christianity. There's this renewed emphasis, especially in the United States, over Christianity and Christian nationalism. I imagine that these intense theological disputes that started from last year are going to continue again. The discussion of how much we can get along will always be tested, and I feel like that will be tested again. So despite the ins and outs of so much of new ideas, new personalities, new videos, new essays, new events, much of the questions from last year, I think, are still on the table to be discussed. And so I think that this year's event theme about forging, a common foundation, or if we even need to, fits very, very well with last year's theme. So if you were interested about what those strategies were from last year, if you bought your event book, you read the speeches, or you listened to them because you were there in person, then you definitely will want to attend, because the questions that we tried to answer and the questions that we posed to ourselves are still going to be hashed out again. And they always will be. These questions are civilizational. And so if you want people that are focused on the future, then all the more reason to attend.
No, I completely agree. You mentioned Christianity quite a few times. One of the big differences from listening to the talks from the UK and US events is this focus in America on religion, which, whilst we have speakers in Britain who will talk about faith and the need for it, it's never focused on in the same way. What advantage do you think there is in focusing on it, as opposed to just saying, well, faith is for the personal sphere, you should be praying privately, etc.?
Well, I think it's also mainly because in the US, the UK as well, I think it's very obvious to tell that we sort of exist with this existing framework of either everything is based only on the concept of consent, and that we've been, even in America, still, as large as its population, a good portion of it's been thoroughly secularized, where the idea of religiosity either exists in immigrant communities, or it's just this obscure moralistic therapeutic deism where oh well, there's a higher power and he just wants me to do well, and that's that. America, of course, has maintained its religiosity more so than other parts of the West, and some might say for worse. I would definitely say for better, because to be on the right, to have a common foundation, and I think this kind of echoes back to Dave the Distributist's great video, To Be Right Wing in 9 Points, is that you need to have some sort of teleological anchor to the world, to know that we are not here forever, and that it is in our best interest to leave things behind for our posterity. And for the United States, its Constitution, it's based for our posterity. Now, I don't think that our current national makeup constitutes our posterity very well, but it certainly illustrated that there was a group of people with a deeply held Christian belief that wanted to ensure that there was something left behind for their progeny and for their posterity. And I think that for those in America, it informs them in their political action much more so than we see in the UK. And that's a fundamental difference between ourselves and our friends across the pond, which is totally understandable, and I respect that difference. I may lament it, of course, but for us, it does inform a great deal of how we want to go. And for many Americans, especially for many of us on the right, regardless of our, say, denominational or church differences, ecclesiologically speaking, there is a strong common bond there for people to recognize that there is evil, there is entropy, there is the evil one at work through leftism that we need to root out. So I think that there's a great deal of importance of it, more so here in America than elsewhere. And so if you are attending from across the pond, you may hear some of that quite a bit while you're there, but it is definitely part of that old time religion of a country that is still very, very young.
Absolutely. And as you said, we're only around on this mortal plane once. So if you are at all interested in anything that Prude has been saying today, I highly recommend you get your ticket while you still can. There's not long left to the event, so please do come along to the Nashville Convention at the end of June this year. Tickets are available in the description. Do you have anything else that you wanted to bring up?
Well, I certainly think that if you do attend, which I highly recommend that you do, I mean, outside of the cavalcade of speakers that will be there, there's also going to be the wonderful portions for question and answering periods. So, of course, if you have any further questions for any of our talks, you will have the opportunity to do so. And I mean, you actually get to meet these people. And the best thing about last year's event, and I'm sure those in the UK who've gone to several now, whether it's with you two or with Nomos, it's been the benefit of all of your sort of petty disputes online, all of the drama, the tweeting, the ratioing, or whatever it may be, that all disappears almost in an instant once you start meeting these people face to face, and you recognize that there's far more that you have in common than you do in terms of differences. And so I would highly recommend that you go for that purpose alone, to recognize that you aren't alone. Digitally, it feels easy to just, tweet out or to reply or message people. It's not the same, of course, as meeting them in person, to buy them a drink, to discuss ideas over coffee or over dinner tables. Those things are fundamentally important for any political movement to survive. It has to exist in the real. And if you actually want to exist in the real and to meet your friends, your like-minded compatriots, and to actually discuss ideas that are going to get people's attention, you should go, because you never know who you're going to meet. And more importantly, you never know what's going to inspire you to create the next great thing. And great things have been made from these events.
Very well said. I will completely reiterate one of your points there about petty differences falling away. I've known several people who have privately moaned about some of the other people that have been in attendance before they've met them. And then when they do meet them, everything becomes immediately cordial. There's absolutely no dispute whatsoever, and everyone, gets on like a house on fire, and they stop moaning after that in private. So, yes, these the power of actually meeting people around a table for around a beer or coffee, a cigarette, or whatever it may be, is immensely powerful. So, yes, completely agree there.
Absolutely. I mean, you should attend. You really should, not just to listen to myself speak or the numerous other speakers, but you will have a great opportunity to see what proper political attendance would look like. This isn't going to be your DSA meeting where people are complaining over Robert's Rules of Order for being sexist or ableist. These are going to be people that seriously want to get things done and have the firm desire to not just talk about abstractions or to listen to themselves talk, because most of the people that will be speaking have done audio editing and can't stand the sound of their own voice, myself included. But you'll get the great opportunity for people to meet and recognize that it isn't just a bunch of like lonely internet people that are all rabble rousing inside a hotel conference room or anything like that. What it is going to be is a mix of people who are pastors, teachers, lawyers, engineers, electricians, plumbers, parents, family members, husbands, fathers, and so on, that all have legacies that they're deeply concerned about preserving and want to ensure that it can be preserved for their next generation, and that those ideas can be passed along. I mean, I think that we're on the precipice of sort of a relatively new dark age, whether that be from increasing censorship or the growing, I think, just political illiteracy of how things work. And so, at the time of, Rome being sacked, it really did sort of behoove those that were classically trained or were of the monastic tradition to preserve great work. And if you want to see what, preserving great work looks like, it means people actually writing things down, meeting together to ensure what needs to be preserved and what needs to be tossed aside. And those kind of conferences and things like that will go a long way. And this is just one of several, I imagine, that will happen in future years.
Yes, hopefully one of several, but it's the only one who can get a ticket for now. So do that, and you can see everyone there at the end of June. Thank you very much, Prude, and I'm sure we'll speak soon.
Yeah, likewise. Take care.